So, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I seriously hope wherever you are in the world today, the weather's a little bit better for you than it is for me here. I'm sitting in the Midlands, and it is a very wet and miserable afternoon. So I'm rather hoping that this succession planning webinar will maybe bring a bit of light into your afternoon, because it's quite miserable. But let's start off with a little bit of housekeeping. So it's going to be about 45 minutes today. And I'm also recording this, so I'll make it available for other people to view on the website also. Now, I am not very good with just webinars where I can't participate. So I always ask people if they would like to use the chat function as well. So there's the chat function that everybody should be able to see somewhere on their screens. Please ask away, ask questions, or offer opinions, share some experiences. I think you get a lot more out of webinars or any kind of learning, really, if you're able to hear what other people talk about and experience, and also get your opportunity to put your 2 pence worth in as well. So what I'll do is every now and again, I will just stop and check the chat function to see if there's any particular comments that's really worthy of sharing. So that's always me trying to multitask, so bear with me in case that slows me down slightly. So there's a little bit of housekeeping just sorted out there. But first of all, let's just get to know each other a little bit. This is where I start to see if you're particularly brave or a little bit more reserved. Please use the chat function now. Just tell us your name and maybe your main interest in succession planning, what's brought you here today. No one is going to judge you or laugh at you whatsoever. There's a small number of us that are all interested in succession planning, so please go for it. Use the chat function and introduce yourself. In the meantime, whilst you're doing that, I will also do the same and just say a little bit about me. So that's me on the slide there. Bit of a cheesy grin, I'm afraid, there. But that's me. I'm Rhiannon. I am the founder and director of Blue Grape Talent. This is where I feel old now, actually. I've got best part of 20 odd years experience and history of working in HR and talent. And during that time, I had some great experiences in work, and I've had some not so great experiences in work as well. But all of those experiences have kind of added to my underlying belief here about, I suppose, people and talent. And I've tried to capture it as succinctly as I can do on the screen there. I genuinely think people are awesome, and we all have the potential to grow or be more than we are right now today. Now, that's not me saying everybody can be and should be the next CEO, but we've got so much potential out there in our organisations that if we could tap into that potential and help people grow, my God, we'd be awesome. And I do think a major impact on people able to be awesome are our line managers and our leaders. And if we focus time and attention not only on, but on our leaders, we can really help release that awesomeness in our people today. And so I suppose that's the kind of thing that shaped and influenced my feelings and my thoughts about people, talent, and organisations. And that's one of the reasons I thought, you know what, I want to set up and run my own business and do this with other like-minded organisations. But what is it that I do, and what is it that Blue Grape specifically does? Well, these are 6 main service areas, I suppose. You could describe us as a kind of a boutique talent management consultancy. We work with smaller but growing organisations and businesses. But do you know what makes us different? Because there's loads of organisations like us out there, but what really makes us different is everything that we do is about understanding why people do stuff. Why do they behave in a particular way? Why do they respond in a particular way? Trying to understand their values, their assumptions, their behaviour. So the more we understand about people, I think the better life and business gets and the easier it gets. This is why I've got a cough for a minute, everybody, so excuse me. Never a good time on a webinar to do that, isn't there? So there we go. That's a very little bit about me and Blue Grape. I've had a few people who are kind of brave. Joanne and Jane out there, thank you. There's more of you than just those two ladies, but thank you for being brave. So Joanne, you're saying that you're looking to learn about succession planning and if or should we implement in your organisation. I like that. Should we? Let's not assume that you should. And Jane, are you currently redesigning your succession processes? So you've got succession planning processes already, but lovely to hear that you're stopping and thinking, is this the right thing? Can I redesign? Can I tweak in any way? Now, there's plenty more people out there. Please don't hold back. If you feel brave enough, just pop your name into the chat function and just tell us all who you are and what's your interest in succession planning. But don't just stop there. As I'm running through, I'll obviously run through some models, some thoughts, some suggestions. As I'm going through this webinar, please do keep using the chat function. If you've got experience of something that has worked or has not worked, please do share with us. You will learn an awful lot more from each other than just from listening to me this afternoon. So that's a little bit about who we are on the call. Let's now think about succession planning. And maybe let's start with a bit of a definition. I know it's a little bit traditional and old-fashioned, but I think it's a good way to start off a discussion, is getting this kind of common agreement and understanding as what it is we're actually talking about. Well, this is my take on succession planning. It's not the only or the best definition, but this is what I look at, or what I think about when I look at succession planning. So for me, it's a system for developing successors for core or critical roles in the business, and generally mitigating the risk of these roles being left empty, or more than that, critical knowledge leaving the business. Now, as I'm saying, that's not the best or the only definition, but kind of over the years, that's kind of where I've settled on, I think is quite a good general description. And it is a system. It should not be a one process or a one tool. It's not one thing in particular. If you think about what makes talent management different to traditional just succession management, as an example, is talent management is an integration of different processes that all fit in and weave together. And this should be exactly the same for succession planning as well. So it's not one thing in particular. And it is a little bit about peering into the future, isn't it? Making some assumptions, and dare I say it, making a best guess. Because we don't know what's really going to happen in the future, but we know that there will be a future of some description. And I think in today's ever more changing world, I think we in HR are being asked even more to try to mitigate some of the risks of businesses being left exposed without the right skills and the right people, and trying to make sure that the gaps are filled. And I think from my experience, organizations are becoming more and more focused on this, which is kind of good news for us in HR, because it's a people process that we've traditionally ran and managed, and it's always great when I see these people processes becoming really important for the rest of the business. But as I said, it is a bit about peering into the future, taking some best guesses. There's not quite a science to it, but we can make it far more effective than just a finger in the air best guess. So before I dive into looking at, okay, what's the best way of doing this, just want to step back a little bit and have a look at some of the common tools that we've used traditionally, and I think we continue to use right now. Because as we go through this, I think if we start to look at these tools in the context of today's work and today's working environment, we might ourselves start to question whether these are still right and still effective. Just before I move on, Vicky, thank you. Another brave lady out there. Thank you for popping in and saying hello. I'm also looking forward to learning more about succession planning. A bit sporadic for you now across the business. Let's see if we can help you make it a little bit more joined up. So the first traditional tool I want to look at probably is one that you maybe know and love, or know and hate at the moment. It's the 9-box grid. Now, whether your 9-box grid looks exactly like that on the screen or not, it's probably going to look a little bit like this. 9-box grid or the matrix. Actually, I think it's kind of stemmed back to, and it was originated within McKinsey, and they first, the consulting firm McKinsey, they first developed it to look at individual business units and to help prioritize the investment in those business units. And then I think most famously started to get known for its use within GE in the kind of the late 60s and the 70s, when they used it to assess the potential of individuals in their businesses and prioritize investment in those individuals. And I'm sure there's a big bit of the influence there from the Boston box as well, that we might all know about from the Boston Consulting Group. And they used it to look at their businesses and their product potential initially, and then kind of moved it across to individuals. So just as I'm going through this, just pop in the comments box, do you use 9-box grid? If you do, how do you find it? What are your thoughts on it? I'll look out for your comments there, but also share a little bit of my thoughts with you as well. You know, on the one hand, 9-box is great because, well, it's simple. There are only 9 boxes that you can use. So it's fairly simple for managers and organisations to get their heads around. I think it's great because it starts a conversation off, doesn't it? Because you have to plot people within the box, where they are from in terms of their potential and their performance, which actually I suppose is another thing I like about it. It does differentiate between performance delivery right here, right now, and the potential for within the future. And it allows you to categorize people, because you could, you know, it takes a conversation from 30 or 40 or more people in an organization, and it starts to put them into smaller groups where you can have a little bit more detailed conversation about them. So, number of, I suppose I'd say, advantages or plus points, but I think we're starting to see more drawbacks than advantages these days. And here's my 2 pence worth on that, I think. Big thing for me, and I think I keep repeating this a few times a day, performance is very contextual. Performance doesn't just depend on that individual. There are so many other things that impact on someone's performance, and our definition or our thoughts around potential as well. So think about it. You could be a great, highly performing person in one organization, in one job, but you move to somewhere else and everything can go wrong. That's because there's so many other things that affect your performance. Systems that you may or may not have, the level of empowerment or authority that you may have, your budget available to you, technology, leadership styles. There are so many different things that affect performance, and I really do challenge people. I was once told, oh, the great people, they'll naturally rise to the top. Well, I don't think they do if they're pulled down by bad systems, lack of process, or no technology. All of these other things do impact on your performance. And let's be honest as well, we are notoriously bad at assessing someone's performance, let alone their potential. And there is so much work that has been done. And I don't just mean academic work, but lots of empirical evidence here in organisations that show us we're really not very good at knowing what on earth performance is. Particularly if you're particularly keen on this topic, I'd highly recommend going to look at some of the work that Marcus Buckingham has done. Because we're not good at identifying what is really performance or potential, we basically look at it through our eyes and what we think of is performance or potential. So we end up with lots of little mini me's out there, because so much is down to our individual bias and our individual experience and view of what is good potential or good performance. Before we realise it, our 9-box grid is populated at the top right-hand corner of lots of people that either look, sound, or at the very least deliver in a very similar way to our current leadership team. Really not great in this day and age when we're trying to get more diversity and more diversity of thought into our organisation. And do you know what? I really do question, how do we know that those individuals will make this future leader? Again, we've based that on our view of how someone is performing right now. But, you know, I challenge, what makes a great individual contributor does not mean they're going to be a great leader. They need different characteristics. But because we're so notoriously bad at identifying what is performance, we're looking at it through our own eyes of little mini me's, then we're looking and we're finding these people that are great individual contributors, but it doesn't mean they're going to make great leaders in the future. And you know what? The reality is, we spend a huge amount of time in HR getting people to do this darn box. I don't know if that's how you felt, how you feel about it. We spend lots of time, energy, and effort getting people to populate this box. The box or the grid becomes the outcome. We never really have performance conversations, and we let alone get into identifying plans and activities for these people. So by the time we've got everybody's names plotted in the right way to the right definitions, you know what? It's drained us in HR. We kind of mop our brow and say, "Thank God that's done for another year," and that becomes our 9-box grid activity. Just identifying people in a box, we lose momentum and engagement from the business to do anything with these people. And actually, where we put them in the box is quite questionable, because it all depends on our view of performance and potential. So, 9-box grid. I'm going to stop for a minute. Let's have a little look. We've got a couple of comments have gone in here. So, yes, we use the 9-box grid, but you're debating on whether it's the right tool to assess talent in the future. Jane, I'm with you on that. And do you know what the biggest thing for me is? It makes our managers look at our employees through their current eyes, or through their eyes, their view of what is performance and potential, and then thinking about the current view of the organisation. There's nothing in here that makes us or encourages us to look from a different perspective and what the organisation might need or look like in the future. I'm with you, Jane, I really am. And Vicky says also that you use this, but it's based on the opinions of senior leaders. You're right. And do you know what? We probably all have given our managers competency frameworks or definitions of what is performance or potential. But we're humans, aren't we? And as much as we could kind of almost staple those definitions into our managers' brains, the way human beings' brains are, even with a common definition, we still view things in a different way. We bring in our own natural biases and interpret things in a different way. So it is very much open to opinions, and depending, I used to find a lot of who kind of shouts the loudest. But, you know, we've used it, it's there, we're still using it, but I do start to question the validity, is it worth the effort versus what you get out of it? And this is because I say that the landscape is shifting, the environment the business is now working. Do you know what? I'm thinking this is becoming a bit more dated. So there's a bit of a negative. I just suddenly thought, I'm ending that on a 9-box grid. Maybe not. So let's move on to another tool that you all might be familiar with, and this is high potential pool. I don't know if any of you have got high potential pools or high potential programs out there. Again, please pop into the chat function if this is something that you do use. Very quickly, the idea of the high potential pool is that you've got a population of people, a small population of people that you think have got the greatest potential to progress within your organisation. And the idea is that you invest a larger proportion of your budget, probably your development budget, on a small proportion of people. And the idea being it'll drive better results. I can still remember I never name names as to what organisations I've worked for, but in a prior organisation, in the days that my daughter would say to me, "When you had a proper job, mummy," I can remember being told, "Well, it's the 80-20 rule, Rhiannon. 80% of your business value comes from 20% of your people. So let's focus on those 20% only." And these are the people, you know, we think are most likely to go into our more senior roles. So we put them in this lovely little pink and fluffy pot, and they get access to probably specific development opportunities. We use them in a different way. Well, the theory sounds great, but the reality is somewhat different. Um, the first point we've got here about 73% of hypo programs. Well, that was from a quite a large scale study done by the CEB, which probably goes back about 2 years now, where actually we showed that no, most of the programs don't actually show a real business outcome or a return on investment anyway. I said I'd mentioned this a few times. We are not great at actually measuring what is potential. I do remember the amount of time and effort that went into figuring out, well, what do we mean by someone who's got potential? And how is that different to someone who performs really well? And there's lots of models that you can use, most definitely. But when you're trying to convince operational managers in the business that no, there's two different behavioral frameworks we might want to look, soon their eyes kind of glaze over. I also, as well, if I'm quite honest, found that this whole concept was quite divisive. In one of the businesses I worked in, I did quite a big survey of their high potential employees. So the view from the high potential pool. And I surveyed them on a number of different things, just trying to understand what was their experience from being in the high potential pool. And also, I talked to people who were not in the high potential pool, and so many people came back to me and said, "Well, I'm not high potential, so that's it. I'm not worth it," kind of thing. For those people who are in the pool, how lovely and how wonderful, because they have the golden badge, but they are the small minority. And then when things get tough, it's the majority that find their budgets are cut. And training stops and development stops, but we try to ring fence things for the high potential people. It becomes very divisive. It's another really powerful concept as well that I've started to see more and more of, and it makes complete sense. It's the influence of one person's expectations on another person's behavior. And we've for a long time now seen this, behavioral scientists, and actually in particular teachers. If we believe somebody is great and worthy, then more often than not, they feel they're great and worthy and they deliver great stuff. But if we feel that people aren't great or are not worthy, that's how they feel and they don't deliver great stuff. It genuinely is that kind of saying of, it's not saying behavior breeds behavior, but expectations. If you expect something, you get it. And again, I've seen more and more research that actually shows that's what's happening with the concept of high potential pools as well. If you're not in the high potential pool, then I'm not saying you kind of switch off, but we don't expect you to be great. So we don't even look for greatness in that pool. And in some examples, well, you get what you expect. We don't get greatness from people outside of the high potential pool. Also, though, I find if you're in the high potential pool, you've got quite an expectation. And these days, we can't live up to those expectations. Career ladders and fast promotion just aren't out there these days. Our organizations are so much flatter. And in my bit of research I did with my guys, they were very frustrated. Look, I've been in this pool for so and so, and I've not experienced training, or I've not experienced a job change. And well, the business I worked in at that time was actually contracting. It was laying people off, and there wasn't the jobs for these high potential people to go into. So we managed to really frustrate those people outside of the pool, but also frustrate those people in the pool as well. Do any of you use high potential pools, or do you have high potential pools at all, or whether that's formally or informally? So far, I've got nobody commenting about hypos. It might be that it's not widely used for you guys out there. I think the one that I can't move away from is the CEB evidence that shows what we thought was going to be the business outcome or the return on investment. Businesses just aren't seeing that anymore. The link of hypos to succession planning is that's where you would traditionally see your hypos. You would expect them to be somewhere on your succession planning charts, I suppose. And I suppose that leads us nicely to the third traditional tool. We've looked at, first of all, the first tool was the 9-box grid. Then the second tool was high potential pools. Third tool could be a little bit more traditional, but it's succession management, the charts and the names in the boxes. I've personally found that this is the tool that most organisations I've worked for in the past have used, and it kind of works fairly simply. We identify, normally it's key senior leader roles in the organisation, and then we look at our population and think, who are the people that could move into those roles? And whether it's exactly this terminology, but we normally find people who are ready now for that role, might be ready soon already with development, and then there's people that we think, no, they're never ever going to be ready. They're not on this plan anyway. But you know what, let me share with you just my kind of anecdotal feedbacks, and please do feel free to share your anecdotal feedback also with using this tool. People messed it up, because I'd spent ages working with business leaders, identifying the positions they want to plan for, discussing individuals in their team who could go into those positions. We'll probably have different views and a great big discussion, and we put people's names in boxes and think, oh great, there's my succession plan done for this year. And then we would look to make some promotions from that succession planning. And do you know what? People didn't fall into line. They might leave. They didn't want the jobs that we thought we planned them to go into. They wouldn't be willing to relocate or to take up a different job, or they didn't realise that was the job that they were on succession floor for, and they didn't like it. They didn't want to do it. So all of this time and energy and effort, then people didn't move into the boxes we put them in. And I know I'm making that light and joking about it, but it just didn't work for us. And I'm wondering if that's also some of your experiences as well. And it took me a while to sit and think, well, what we think succession planning is all about, that kind of world, we don't operate in that world anymore. Great big question I started to ask myself, also, not just ask myself, but see and realise as well, look, some of the jobs we were succession planning for just didn't exist in the real world or in the future world. Because why? We kept restructuring all the time, or we kept selling off a part of an organisation, or growing a different part, or setting something else up. So where we thought people might go to, they didn't. Also, as well, very quickly realised that careers, well, they're not linear, they're not predictable. As I said, that's not where some people wanted to go to. They thought they wanted to go in a different direction altogether. Big thing for me in this process is no, and maybe you can say, well, that's because, Rhiannon, you did it wrong. We didn't really hear the individual's voice. In fact, when I go back to that CEB research, a lot of that research came out that either high potentials or people who were on a succession planning plan, a lot of people weren't told that they were in the high pool or on a succession plan, because we didn't want to tell them in case they left, or in case they got almost in a way kind of too big for their boots. I am paraphrasing there. And that's not untypical. The individual's voice isn't heard. We don't know if that's where they want to go or not. And I genuinely do find that it's quite siloed and not cross-functional, because definitely in the big organisations, to make this manageable, you tend to break down these little diagrams into functions or into business units. And then it was very hard then to get people to move between functions or between business units. Because whether we like it or not, managers were a little bit territorial, and they didn't want to lose their high potential and their successes in their organisation. It drove us to be more siloed and to be a little bit more selfish. So Jane, you said, yeah, this is a clunky process. But interestingly, Jane, you still use it as part of your corporate governance responsibilities. Would you be okay and willing to tell us a bit more about that, Jane, if it's it's clunky what's driving your business to still want you to use that then. Because this is quite a traditional approach to succession planning. And I suppose, yes, it's what do we give organizations as an alternative? We're often heard about business planning, and in case of emergencies, we do need to know, who might, business continuity is what I'm thinking. Have we got the right people lined up to continue if something happens? And this is what I used to find a lot of business continuity people wanted to see. Yeah, there you go. So you've got plans in place for orderly succession to the board and the senior management positions. It's simple, isn't it? And organisations, it gives them a little bit of confidence that, yes, if Flossie leaves, Fred will take over, or if Jane goes, then Barney will step in, kind of thing. Sometimes, though, we've got to help our business see the reality is, no matter who we plan for, there's no guarantee that they will go into that role. Right, I've painted a really bleak picture now, I suppose, and I don't intend to, but look, I'm saying, let's just stop. A bit of good news before I just say, oh, it's all terrible and awful and we shouldn't do any succession planning. Let's just stop and rethink, though, because I am painting quite a bleak picture. But I'm giving you the permission to stop and think. And how often in HR do we get that? Stop and think, do we really need a succession plan? And if we do, are these the best tools to use? Let's face it, succession planning is one of those cornerstone HR processes that almost, if I jokingly say, in HR school, we're told that we really need. It's a bit like having annual appraisals and linking pay to performance. We really do need that, don't we? That's what we're told that we must have to be a good HR person. Well, I think given how much our business environment and our world has changed and is changing, I think we should question some of that traditional wisdom and convention. Why would we still operate with a process that looks not a lot different to how it first was designed for places like GE that used this back in the 70s? Our business environment is so different now. We can't make those hard and fast plans for what our business will look like because we don't know what that future will look like. So what will our business look like? And that's quite a hard thing for some organisations to accept. I totally see that point of view. But here's an alternative. I don't think we stop and we throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think that we need to stop and think differently. And first of all, I kind of relate it almost back to a car, I suppose, and this is me. I know nothing about cars and maintenance. So whenever I use this example, everybody laughs at me because they know I don't know anything about cars. But let's almost lift the bonnet, have a look what's going on inside, the car being our business and our organisation. Have a look around about what's going on inside our organisation, but also stand up and look at the road ahead and think about what journey does that organisation or that car needs to go on as well. And it's not a big surprise, I'm saying let's go back and understanding the organisation, its operating environment and its future needs. And here are just some things to think about. But the questions to ask yourself, definitely, do you really think you need succession planning? If you do, what are the business issues that you're facing or are likely to face in the future? What are the people issues that you're facing or are likely to face in the future? And then just ask yourself that question again. And do you really need a succession plan? And do you really need it now and in the way that we've traditionally done that? And this is where I think let's be brave, because I think probably most people on the call will say, well, yes, we do, whether we like it or not. There is a call from our corporate governance planning and things that we do need to have a succession plan. But let's be brave and let's start with a blank sheet of paper. A lot of people that I do work with ask me, well, can you just give me some succession planning documents and processes? And often I say, well, no. because what works here doesn't mean it's going to work well for you there. Maybe I'm just a rubbish business person and I lose clients that way, but I'm not one for just giving out a process. I'd like to really understand what you're trying to achieve and what type of an organization are you? What type of, I suppose, employer proposition, what type of a culture are you offering to your employees? And what do I mean by that? Well, at its simplest, there's this spectrum. And we could all exist on a different part of this spectrum. I'm not saying that anything is right or anything is wrong, but let's think about it. You've got organisations with a culture and a climate at one end, at the left-hand side, where the organisation controls access to training, development, promotion, where there's very much, I might say, the traditional employee relationship and psychological contract, where the organisation has spans of control, managers say yes or no. But at the other end of the spectrum is something really quite different, where the individuals own their own training, they can drive their own careers and their own promotion, and then there's a whole million points somewhere in between. And this speaks a lot around your organisational culture, probably the life cycle of your business. A lot of my really small clients sit more at the right end of the spectrum because they're fairly new in their organisation, and more of my larger clients sit more in the left-hand side of the organisation because just culturally, well, they've been around longer and the culture has grown into something different. But let's face it, more and more people, so I'd say employees and also some of the more and more enlightened organisations, are questioning this traditional psychological contract, moving away from the employer as the decision maker, with more control and more of a kind of an adult relationship, employee and employer together. So where you sit on this spectrum and where you want to sit on this spectrum should drive the nature of your succession planning process. So if you're more at the left-hand side, you are probably going to be more driven by individuals' names in boxes, whereas at the left-hand side, there's probably going to be more of a conversation around, well, where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Having said that, wherever you sit and want to position yourself on this spectrum, I think that there are some general tools that you can use that are not a million miles different to what we have seen, that you can still use and I think operate far better in a future type organisation. Right, is there anything? No, nobody else put anything in the chat box for a minute. Right, so let's move on and let me show you what I think we could use in the future. And again, I'd love your thoughts and your feedback on some of these suggestions. So this is my take on how can we update the traditional succession management process. Well, what we saw historically is we succession manage for particular jobs, individuals and jobs. But as I said, I just don't think we're in that world anymore. And I used to find it a number of years ago, a number of things. We'd say, here are the successors for X, Y, or Z job. Either those people didn't want to do the job when they really understood what it was about, or they left, or they went to somewhere different career, or that job didn't exist anymore. So I'm saying let's succession manage for skill pools instead of specific jobs. Let me use the general manager one there as a bit of an example. So I used to work for an organisation that was service-based, and it was a service organisation that had a number of branches, traditionally branches that were across the country, and they were increasingly changing and moving away from being physical branches to virtual branches. We realised that customers didn't come into the branch, so why on earth did we have a building there with people stuck in there? But we knew whatever happens to that, say, general manager job, whether they are field-based or centrally based, we still need a number of skills from a general manager. We still need them to be able to manage a P&L, to manage people, to manage customer and customer experience, to manage processes. There are things that we would always need that kind of job to do, We don't know where in the country, if at all, those jobs would be based, whether they would be based in this country or a different country, but we knew we'd always want some kind of general manager posts. So we stopped succession planning for specific posts in the regions and just started to plan for a general manager skill pool. Suddenly we had far fewer people put on that succession planning list, which I felt actually was a reflection of we don't really have the people with the skills out there. We just had a Fred, Flossie or Jim that sat in the branch, and we found a name for someone that could succeed the general manager, but could based on who have we got out there. Another example I've come across is with business partnering. Very different example here. Different organisation I used to work for. We had HR business partners with finance, and we had procurement business partners. But what we realised is that actually the skill base was pretty much the same. Yes, apart from that technical knowledge, but at that level, as a business partner, what was more important for us was their ability to partner with a particular business unit, understand that business unit's challenges, build relationships. Actually, secondary was the specific HR or finance knowledge. Primarily, what we wanted was someone that could partner with the business. So we started the succession plan for all of those jobs together. So there's similarity here in the traditional job succession planning, but quite a significant difference is not looking at specific jobs, but looking at skills. We don't know what the jobs are that we're going to need in the future. But if we find some generic skill pools and think about critical jobs, not just leadership roles, and a broader talent base, then we get some far more meaningful succession plans of people who would actually be willing to go into those roles and could do those roles, rather than just the usual names on the slides that we used to find. So succession management, but in the 21st century. Also another thing, and believe it or not, I do think this should be part of our succession planning process, is these career conversations or performance conversations developed. They're traditionally part of our appraisals or performance management processes, but this is where we get the employee's voice, the employee's view. And a lot of organizations have not done this, but have sat there and plotted names in boxes without really understanding what the individual wants. And isn't this what talent management should be about? An integrated approach. So let's really, how can we take, and if we are not having, how can we, I suppose, first have these career conversations and then take all that meaningful data and feed that into our succession planning processes as well. So it really is becoming a two-way thing, not just where we think we should see the employees, but where do our people want to be in the future as well. And then for me, the final kind of shifting here is this high potential pool. Now, I'm not saying I am. Let's face it. I am kind of saying, let's drop this high potential pool. Why do we need to have a small number of people that have got access to training and development opportunities? Number of different reasons here. Let's have an open curriculum where everybody can access learning, not necessarily training. Now, a couple of things here just to kind of explain. This does also mean that you have to try to move your organization on from what is training, or rather, we don't think that training is going on a course, but learning could be a number of these things that we see on the screen here. So why not invest maybe what we used to invest in our hypo pool by getting rid of that and invest in everybody? Because it's not only your high potentials that should be on your succession planning document. I look back and I think some of the most challenging job moves I've experienced haven't been a promotion, they've been sideways moves. I moved from a business partnering role into a head of shared services role in the past. My God, the most un-HR job I have ever done. It wasn't a promotion, it was a sideways move, but I learned so much from that experience. I wasn't in the high potential pool. But by not being in that pool, I still didn't miss out on that, which was for me personally an amazing move for the rest of my career. I didn't have to be high potential to do it. So by almost dropping our view of high potential and high potential feeding into the succession plans alone, we've suddenly got this far bigger talent base, and we're suddenly able to give more people more opportunity to develop. We're more likely to retain those people, and we're actually living, well, what we say, we can't offer career ladders for everybody, but we can offer career lattices for people. And that's where I think a lot of our jobs in the future are not going to be bigger, more senior jobs. They're just going to be different jobs, sideways moves that require different skills. So that does lead me back to questioning the value of the high potential pool, because not all of our jobs that are going to be important, our critical jobs, are going to be of more senior jobs. So that does go back to questioning the purpose of succession planning. Is it to succession plan for leadership roles only, or is it to succession plan for core or critical roles? The amount of people I've spoken to in the past 2 or 3 years, as I'm moving more and more into hospitality sides of my clients, they talk about their core and critical roles being people like porters in hotels, receptionists in hotels, actually housekeeping, because these are the people that face their customers and interact with their customers on a day-to-day basis. They are some core roles for them. Now, that doesn't mean that they succession plan for those roles, but they are very particular about the people they hire into those roles. And that's what really got me thinking differently about succession planning. It shouldn't just be for our leadership roles. We should be looking at some of these core roles. And then that's where my head started to move into business partnering roles. Well, they're not necessarily leadership roles, but they are critical as both the finance and the HR functions change and more becomes automated. We need to think about what are the critical and core roles of the future. So that's my slight change on the, well, this is a significant change. I am saying let's think twice about the high potential pool, and let's shift our assumption to thinking about development for everybody, because the critical and core roles in the future aren't just the leadership roles. But all of that, and then when I started to pull this together, I thought, crikey, then I need to really go back and say, well, is my original definition of succession planning still valid? Or have I changed the whole thing altogether? Well, no. When I look at that, a process for identifying and developing successors for core or critical roles. Now, I think it is still valid, but what I think is changing is the environment in which businesses operate. No longer can we use the tools that were fairly static and almost once a year and revolved around a small handful of jobs, mainly in the leadership area and leadership roles. But now we need to think more broadly about succession planning and think about our critical roles or our core roles, and looking across all of our organisation, not just at a small pool of high potentials, that when we really look at how we've identified those high potential people, it's based on not a common understanding as to what is performance or potential, and it's leaving out a huge number of people in our organisation. We don't need to be high potential to do some of these critical roles. Indeed, I'd argue that some of these more senior leadership roles are not just are starting to be, but have been pulled out of organisations. So how do we update our thoughts of succession planning into the 21st century? Well, by making succession planning less about upwards planning and more about broad planning across the organisation, and by thinking about critical roles as critical roles, not leadership roles. So that would suggest to me that we need to update the tools in our toolbox that we've traditionally used for succession planning. So hopefully I've shown that, although I do hope I'm not suggesting that you throw everything out and don't succession plan. I hope I am saying to you, well, stop and think before you do succession plan. For some of my smaller clients who are growing by easily 100% plus a year, some of the small ones can go from 10 employees to 30 employees in 12 months. It's just succession planning, it's just too slow. If you're a rapidly growing business, do think twice about succession planning. But if you're not and you do need a succession plan, stop and think, well, what environment am I operating in? Is it really sensible for me to succession plan for critical roles? Should I be succession planning for skill pools instead? Because I don't actually know exactly what my critical roles are going to be in the future. And I know that's really hard for us in HR because the business pushes us for these business continuity plans. As I said, Jane has said here in the past, she does it, even though it's clunky, she's been kind of in a way, it's forced, hopefully it's not too strong a word for you there, Jane, to do it because that's what the board and senior management positions, want to see. And that's fine, but even at the board and senior manager positions, they change. So if we're just succession planning for that particular job, I suspect within 12 months, those jobs on those senior boards will have changed also. So it's time to think more broadly about succession planning. So you've heard a lot from me. Here's a very quick summary slide. If there's anything you want to take away from today, I can't give you, and I won't give you here is the process and here are the documents that you should use. But I would say here are the main points if you want a succession plan in your organisation that you can go through. That will allow you to create a succession planning process that is bespoke to your organisation. But I would also love to carry on with this conversation because I'm slightly enthusiastic about succession planning and talent management in the 21st century in general. If there's anybody on the call that would like to talk some more about your succession planning needs, or whether it's imminent or just in the future, or you just want to kind of chew the cud about this, so to speak, please just say, yes, please in the comments box below, or drop me a line. It's my email and my telephone number there. There's the website for the organisation for Blue Grape as well. Please reach out. I'd love to talk some more. But in the meantime, I hope this has been helpful. If nothing else, that it's given you some food for thought and has helped you think a little bit differently about your succession planning. So it's still very miserable weather-wise for me here. I'm afraid I feel like going to light the fire and put a big woolly jumper on, so I might just do that. Hopefully everybody else enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and hopefully I will see you on a future webinar. Check back on bluegrapetalent.co.uk. I run a webinar every month. Thanks. See you all now. Bye-bye.